Hello, this is George Lees. It's some time since I made a video. I've been deeply looking into how the religious system and the control of all the denominations and faiths across the world works. It is ever so clever, but some of it is really childish and incredible. I've discovered concepts like cephalophores, which are saints that get their heads lopped off and make speeches and sermons within 6 miles of the place where their head was lost. They carry it with them, talking all the way into eternity and sainthood for the particular church that they're involved in. Now, the saints' names are so much used and abused that the same ones keep coming up again and again and again. And if you watch the news or you read the news, you'll see that I've been focusing a lot on my research since Christmas, which is one of the master plans for merchandising and marketing globally a false icon, which is a false religion like all of the human religions. And Christmas has now consumed the globe, and I've discovered a lot of stuff about the parallels between Christianity and Judaism, that's the Jewish faith, and I now believe strongly that there are a series of secret societies that are way over 2,000 years old that have followed around the Roman Empire, and they've gone into North Africa, they've gone all across Europe, and eventually they've penetrated Ireland off the coast of the Celtic nations in Britain and the Anglo-Saxon nations, and the last places to go were up in the north, in the Russian region, a place called Kievan, that took as long as 1,000 years to penetrate. And I just want to tell you first about the stuff I've been reading in Paris about the Hunchback in Notre Dame and the new Gothic church building exercises that accompanied Christianity into France, with the opposition of the Gauls and the pagans in that nation. Now, what has happened this week since I began to reveal the massive fraud that is the Messianic religions? They've had terror events in French cities. They've got it all over the page, the front pages of all of the British newspapers, and this is the second time in the last 3 or 4 years. They've had a couple of killings in France that were never solved, and they had a couple of shootings at a school which was a Jewish school in that country, and that was 2 or 3 years ago now. The French are very deceitful in all of their geopolitical manipulations. I've told you about the Jacques Foccart regime and the de Gaulle Pompidou regimes under brutal ownership of the narcotics sector, the oil sector in French colonial Africa, and all of the shenanigans involving their coercion files on every French politician, led by Foccart, who's a really ruthless man that runs the presidents by coercion and runs the whole government with coercion bureaus and linked into the intel organizations that are so damaging for all of the countries of the world. So I want to tell you first about, I'm a fan of Blondie because I'm old enough to remember Blondie being one of the biggest musicians on the globe, and she sings a song called Denis, Denis, and I think, what the hell is that about? So I have a look at the lyrics, and it becomes obvious that the later releases of the videos for Blondie singing that are about coercion of politicians. And I think to myself, wow, that's quite strange, isn't it? And then I have a little look, and I realise that Denis is the name of a saint, and the Denis linkage is the same linkage that we have to Celine Dion. Everything keeps being replayed. I don't know how many gods there are, and I don't know how many of the names that are used by the humans to describe the gods and the immortals in the human race that may well qualify to be gods over time with sufficient propaganda. But what you've got with Saint Denis, or Saint Denis, is a man who was martyred 10 kilometres from the place he was buried, and he got there himself under his own steam, making an orator's speech all of the way. And the orator concept comes up as a joke in the Hunchback and Notre Dame movie, which is quite touching if you watch it, because it shows the persecution of the human race by the religious betters, and it shows the innocent people that understand the fraudulent writing of the Bible. That is the hunchback or the bell ringer. He is the most compassionate and thoughtful figure in the whole film. That's the version of the Hunchback in Notre Dame that I was quite stunned to see features a character called Brian Haw, who's been depicted in popular culture as an anti-war protester in the city of London. In this movie he appears as the head of the Gypsy Nation and the French Men on the Street Brigade, talking of course with an absolutely broad Cockney accent. I remember Greg Hallett's delivery on the world ownership and how it all comes together through the City of London, and I believe that the City of London is the whore in the last chapter of the Christian Bible, and I believe that the politicians in London believe that the City of London is the whore in the Christian Bible, which is why they've got all the flood control mechanisms down near Greenwich, where all the intel operations are run from. And the Catty Sark was damaged in a big fire recently, and Baroness Blackstone runs her Anglo-French crimes from the university sector down there, which from the buildings that were owned by the British Admiralty. But back to Paris for a bit, and let's talk about the media's panic attack. I'm revealing the ownership of the world, and the media cannot cope with that because they lie to the world about everything that happens, including the terror events, the beheadings, and the Islamic threat that they perpetually bring out and fearmonger with since World War I and the infamous Dreyfus case, where the anti-Semitism was brought forward, all the ethnic hatred was brought forward, and World War I was then just a formality on the horizon. And we know all about Woodrow Wilson's coercion in World War I now, and how that pulled in the Yanks, and we know all about the extension of the war by those 2 vicious years, and the Blackadder, Rowan Atkinson, Mr. Bean jokes about the culling of the people at Gallipoli, and turning that into a media joke about the war correspondent for Gallipoli, Mr. Bean. Anyway, I'm flirting with the religious concept in Paris, but Saint Denis, Saint Denis, Saint Dion, whichever you want to call him, was killed in he was killed in with two colleagues, one of whom was called Eleutherium. So you've got the Lutheran concept way before the divide in the religions, and before we have the Protestantism. And the other victim of the martyrdom in that triumvirate, Holy Trinity if you like, was a chap called Rusticus. Okay? And they lived on the islands in the stream in Paris. Everything is a joke. The Romans inhabited the higher ground on the left bank, and the martyr was martyred at one of Rome's highest hills, that is the Montmartre place, and there are massive basilicas and churches in the Gothic mode in all of those places now, because Christianity took 300 to 600 years to get a firm hold in that country, and when it got its hold, everything is even more ruthlessly twisted in all of the news about all of the nations and all of the neighbouring countries and all of the brutally run French Commonwealth, and the Free French operation in Buckinghamshire, which was immune from bombing, and we've already told you all about that, and the loyalists who were killed in the returning troops and who were buried under the Free French embassy in Buckinghamshire in huge numbers, because they were the loyalists returning to the leadership team, who were not loyalists at all. They're entirely profiteers. De Gaulle spent his whole war in leafy Buckinghamshire, totally immune from risk, and as a total traitor to his nation. Okay? The religious fraud is worse. Okay? You've got the persecution of women in the movie about the Hunchback of Notre Dame. These are gypsy women, and they are women that are able to save people who are being tried and condemned to life sentences, or condemned to be hung or to be guillotined. And if you have a woman who is prepared to take ownership of a man from the Gypsy or Romany nations, then that is where the woman Esmeralda comes into the movie. Because the Hunchback of Notre Dame stands up for the persecuted woman and her lover, who are innocents and portrayed as such in the movie, the clerics are played by the actor Richard Harris, and they lust for the woman. The woman is persecuted and saved by the Hunchback, and the Hunchback is tortured and threatened with a death sentence too. Everybody except the corrupted clerics and the lustful clerics are punished for their sins. They're beaten, they're whipped, and the gallows awaits them that cannot avoid the total net of deceit. Other movies are made about religious persecution and the Inquisitions. They are also based in France, and Sean Connery plays a jocular role in that he is the inquisitor that was forced to give the wrong decision to save his own life, and the person who played the inquisitor, who's much more ruthless than him, is the man who plays Salieri in the Mozart film. And all of the jokes are absolutely ruthless. When you look at the Mozart film and how one of the greatest musicians that the world has ever known was persecuted by the twits that ran the country and the emperors and their friends, that person died in a pauper's grave, and the man who persecuted him, using the Shania Twain joke, when I discovered the Shania Twain joke about Mozart, Mozart's dad was called Leopold, and Shania Twain, I'm a great fan of hers because of her physical attributes. When I've heard her speak and I've heard her talk about her shopping sprees, I've lost a lot of my ardour for the woman. But when I realise that when she's wrapped up in the leopard skin coat, what you have is a joke about the persecution of Mozart all of those years ago in the Austrian court. She walks on looking at, men that they have massive chests, they are very tall, they're driving big tracks, and they're big, heroic looking men. She rejects their advances, proclaiming that she's not, forget the name of the song, that does not impress me much. She's dressed from top to bottom in leopard skin, and Leopold was the dad of Mozart, and the leopard skin thing ties into the Calpurnius Piso joke and all of the religious frauds. But she's also got a massive hat box, and in that hat box is the joke about the Mozart movie and the Leopold character that was Mozart's dad. When Mozart's dad died, Salieri was alleged to have used his fear of his father's disciplinary regime to have taken Mozart to his death as a pauper, as he manipulated his portfolio of commissions in music. And that's what the big hat box is about. And then when you see Shania Twain singing God Bless the Child, making the cloven hoof symbol before she begins to sing with the black people, where she's supporting the black charities and the children, then you realise that that woman gets a little flurry of snowfall when that story comes out and the penny drops. Relatively innocent compared to what they did in Biafra, but it is still a cynical joke by a woman who pretends that she has been brought up from a socialist household and a working class family like the cowboy myths. Okay. And then you learn that the Saint Denis martyr thing is also a joke in popular culture. So remember the film about the outback man in Australia? In the Gothic churches that are built like the Saint Denis Basilica, there is no room in the aisle, and often the aisle is elevated and it is narrow enough to be able to walk along on the martyrs' heads. Yeah, remember that the martyrs, most of them were beheaded, so they are cephalophores. Yeah, and the science of looking at who should be a saint is really interesting, and it is called hagiography. Now, hag is an old whore or a witch, and you can see that the paganistic concepts are jokes about the people who specialise in the appointment of the sainthood. Okay, so in Saint Denis Basilica, which is a new design, the windows are completely different. I could explain every one of the architectural gestures to you, but I want to explain why the aisle is narrow and why that is a joke in popular culture. So it's narrow enough to be the heads of the saints who became cephalophores in Paris, and that means that you have generated the catwalk joke in Paris fashion shows, and it then becomes a joke when Mick Dundee loses his American lover in the station in New York, which is the Empire State joke for the New World Order. Then he is able to get her back into his loving arms by walking over the heads of the people on the station platform. And that is the Saint Denis catwalk joke. And Mick Dundee is a much feared figure in that movie, and Australia has absolutely persecuted its own indigenous people, and absolutely swept the board with Christianity and with alcoholism, when the natural pagans who were planted there cannot cope with the Western lifestyle. And so there are other people that have become martyrs and have been beheaded, and one of them is St. Valerie, and she lives in a region of the country called Limousin, and that leads to a whole new series of jokes about the Limousin, because the Limousin is now a stretch limo, and it's sung about by all of the heroes and figures at the top of the popularity trees. The Oscar winners use them, the politicians use them, and they're even used in the funeral services now. And when you look at the grave diggers in the MOZART movie, where the whole of the opera sector that was dominated by him, he was put down by the emperor's courtiers and the musical experts, who were actually greedy, self-sustaining buffoons. When you look at the faces of the people who put Mozart in a pauper's grave and chuck the lime on top because it's unidentified, there is no need to have a cross or a figurine or a headstone. He's in a mass grave with the other poor people. The man who chucks the lime on it is the composer of the West End musicals. I forget his name. He does all of the Hunchback and Notre Dame films, all of the things about cats, and all of the things about dropping the gem in the ocean. And his name is, oh my goodness, he's had a heart attack, and the name will probably come back to me before I finish the little interview. So I want you to realise that, and all of the things about the martyrdom, it is really, really difficult to be credible, and when you look back at the hagiography and you see that it needs the creation of dragons and serpents, and when you see the front page of the news in Paris since I began to do this research, you see that the story making is just as incredulous now, so that the people, the masses, can be controlled using the same mind-bending techniques. And what I want to tell you is about the MITHRIL, and the role for the Christian Jewish cabals, and for even the pre-Christian Romans joining secret societies and joining these places in all across Europe and right across into Great Britain. The Romans left Great Britain, I think, around 55 BC, or they may have been there longer than that.